And thank you very much, Mr. Big Voice. It's hour number two of our program. In fact, going to try to wrap a lot of things into this 1 hour today. Also, tomorrow, we have a couple of great guests coming by. There is a Vietnam Veterans Memorial Service or Remembrance Service taking place this weekend at City Park. We have some guests coming by from that organization tomorrow morning, as well as Anna Workman. She's got some more details on the upcoming Patriots Night, July 2nd, which will take place at the College of Southern Idaho. So I just wanted to share that with all of you this morning. And so in case you were thinking you might dash off and do something else tomorrow, I really think you need to hear these people because they're talking about people who've done a lot of sacrifice for this country, which is not necessarily a common virtue any longer. 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, 58 at our studios. Hey, I've got some more, a couple of other quick things for you. A friend of mine in the last hour of the show texted me and said, when it comes to offering your trust to your government, he said, take a look at what happened with the recent anthrax mailings. It appears that somebody in government goofed, and then anthrax was mailed not only to labs around the United States, but as far away as Australia. Hey, I want you to be my friend. Here's some anthrax. Just does not win you many converts. And apparently then the government lied about its mistake. Oops. And there's a big story, lead story on Drudge right now this morning. It happens to be about this Pacific Trade Agreement and how much power it gives China. And they're keeping it secret, and they're telling you, oh, it's going to be good for you. It'll be wonderful. Well, it also turns out that they may be able to turn around then and share your personal data as an American with the foreign governments who sign this agreement. Yes. And of course, it cedes control of the internet to the international community. Well, okay, and why don't we just have the United Nations come in? They can bring in the blue-helmeted thugs and just take us over. I mean, why do we have to do it all gradually? Let's just put our cards on the table at this point. It seems to me that we're dealing with a government that has gone rogue, and at some point, somebody's got to pull out the pitchfork and say, I think I've had enough. I have this from the Wall Street Journal today. Daniel Henninger, a great writer. In fact, he's a busy man, I'm sure. I have written him before, though, and there's an email attached at the bottom of his columns online, and I've written him before, and he is always gracious enough within an hour usually to send me a reply. He's writing about what happened at the EPA last week. By fiat, the EPA has taken control and expanded the definition of navigable waterways in this country, which could mean if you're a farmer in the Magic Valley, that you are going to have some serious issues, perhaps, that are coming up in your life. I'll get to my caller in just a moment. Landowners across America, he writes, woke up to discover that the EPA has designated ponds, creeks, rivulets, ditches, catch basins, and water-filled potholes as subject to what the Clean Water Act originally called navigable waters. This is not, he writes, the Democrat Party of Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey, Jimmy Carter, or even Bill Clinton. It is the progressive left wing, which one party controlled by defeating the Clintons. As a matter of ideology, it is impatient with the pace of change possible under the previous system in our country of checks and balances. 10 after 9, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, Bill, on this Pacific trade deal, I called Crapo and Risch twice now, and in D.C. and talked to their aides about it. And I said, send me a letter explaining why you are in favor of this. I haven't received one from Crapo. I got one from Risch that was so vague that it was an insult. And I said to him, I says, you know what? I mean, I may not be the smartest person in the world, but I'm a businessman here in southern Idaho. And I says, if I was standing next to Jim Risch and he said that to me, I would say, I would call him on it. When we've got to quit acting like these people are something, the honorable senator. Sure, some of them might be, but I have serious doubt. And at least Crapo and Risch are somewhat on the stick, and they are somewhat conservative, but they can't tell me why they're in favor of this. And then I get Farm Bureau magazine, and I noticed that they were also in favor of it too. And I just have yet to have, I need to, find out why. And then, of course, if you have to go into the secure room, you can take notes, but you can't take your notes with you. 5 of the chapters, 5 of the pages or chapters, whatever it is, are about trade. The rest of them, there's 29 or 35, I guess, or 29 of them that are not about trade at all. And we don't even know what they are.
I think that a lot of your senators who support this, from whether it be Idaho and Washington State and Oregon, because it cuts across party lines in this region. It is a regional thing because they look at it and they say, aha, here's an opportunity to sell potatoes, beef, and apples to the Chinese. And I don't think that beyond that they've looked into the details of this. And it's unfortunate because sometimes when you reach to grab that bauble, there's something more that's attached that you don't want.
Well, has it gotten to the point where we don't even read the legislation we intend to pass? Is it really, I mean, seriously, I mean, what kind of BS is this?
When the President of the United States will not show you a lot of that legislation, you should be concerned because he has already shown an aptitude toward ruling by fiat.
How can he deny that to the people that are supposed to? This, you know what? It's such a mess that what it once was is no longer is, and I think we're so far down the damn road that we'd like to think we're all right, but maybe we're just delusional.
We're not, but I think it's all right, we're saying we're not. Some of us may be, or we're just plain, we'd like to ignore the facts. I thank you much for the call. You have a lot of people in government, as I say, who they just look at the first thing they see about this and they think, aha, I can win some votes from some constituents by telling them they can sell that product overseas. On the other hand, when the constituent learns that all of their personal records are now held by the Chinese Politburo, they may have a difficult, maybe they're not worried about that. Because, if you can't trust your government, maybe you can trust them. Are we seeing much of a difference any longer? You've got organizations within the federal government who are extra constitutional. That is, they were not there nor mentioned when the Constitution was drawn up in this country. Take your education department, your housing department, the EPA, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago. They are not controlled by legislators. That is, not controlled by Congress. They are governments unto themselves and make decisions. And you know why that happens? Because legislators felt they were so overwhelmed, they don't read the bills at the first place. Well, we don't have time. So what they did is they decided they what's called enabling legislation. They gave all of these extra constitutional offices the ability to promulgate, that is, create the laws on their own and then even enforce them on their own. Do you realize that I think it's the Department of Education has its own SWAT teams? Why? Because they can. They burst into somebody's home in California a couple of years ago because they thought there was a problem with the kids not being sent to school, and they just came storming through the doors, guns blazing practically. It's mind-boggling. This is the United States of America. Why does the Department of Education need to have its own jackbooted thugs? Over at the Washington Examiner, this is about the EPA, which of course is a government unto itself. The biggest change in the rule is that it gives the EPA wide latitude to make case-specific determinations about any water within a 100-year floodplain or within 4,000 feet of the high tide lane, or the line, that is, or the ordinary high water mark of a river, stream, or covered tributary. Landowners within a quarter mile of a lake, river, or stream or tributary are pretty much at the agency's mercy. So let's say you are running a farm here in the Magic Valley, and the EPA comes along and says, we're worried about what may be in that puddle over there. And you say, well, it rained the other day, and that puddle isn't. Yes, but that's a source of water in this community, and they may be able to come onto your property. And they don't have a warrant, but they may be able to just come bursting, and then they may say, we need to see your records. This has gotten to the point where we really need to start considering, let's be honest about it, if not insurrection, maybe we need to talk about going our own way. And I think that was tried once before in this country, but perhaps this time we can make a go of it. I don't even think the blue states want us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
I remember about a year and a half ago, I think they were having private meetings about the water issue, and they wouldn't let anybody know what they were talking about. And it was actually on this show. I think our biggest problem is the government. They need to do less, obviously, because they can't handle what they're doing. They need to farm it out to people that we didn't vote for. They're out of control, and I think we need to kick them out of Idaho.
I'll go along with that.
They control too much of our property. That's why we don't have money for our schools, because they don't follow through on what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to pay us because they use all of our property, or they lock it up, I should say. They don't use it. They let it burn. I'm sick of it, and I know a lot of people are.
I thank you much for the call. I think that we're fast approaching a period in this country. Right now, it's about maybe 1856 or 1857, if you're looking for a historical perspective on all of this. But 1860 and 1861 aren't far away, and you could hear people talking about secession. His point about the EPA is spot on. As it turns out, the Washington Examiner explains in its story this morning, the EPA decided to hold public hearings because that at least is what they're required to do before they develop any of their new, they call them regulations, but a regulation is law. So the EPA decided it was going to have public hearings, but it didn't announce those public hearings to many people, although they did announce them to various liberal groups around the country, liberal environmentalists. So those people showed up and they offered comments. But in other words, you didn't hear them from farmers. You didn't hear them from industry. So all you heard them from was fellow travelers. And the fellow travelers came in, and then the EPA said, aha, we have our input and we have our consensus. And these are the new rules. Well, again, the economy in this country contracted in the last quarter. I ask you, do we need any more rules and regulations? You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
Yes. I was calling in regards to when you were talking earlier a little about the religion stuff. I just wanted to share a quick story. I'm a full-time student right now over at CSI, and I had taken astronomy, and there was a lot of questions and whatnot about God and astronomy. It's just how it is, and its relationship to what we're learning. And it was interesting because I took the time to go to my professor, because professors are generally, unfortunately, pretty liberal on a standard part. And I asked him, well, where did the disconnect come from secular understanding and applying God? And it was an interesting conversation and his reaction to that. Now,
got to make it quick. We got about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I will. The only reason I'm getting to that point is I'm talking about politically speaking here. That disconnect comes from a misunderstanding on both parts. And so what I mean by that is if one is misunderstood and the other is misunderstood, they're both going to get nowhere. And so where we're seeing in the political realm is the misunderstanding and the ignoring of the religious aspect, which is causing a lot of the disconnect that we're seeing between the laws and what we have.
All right. Thank you much for the input. We've got a break coming up. Weather, also, I've got to mention that quickly. My following guest is in pretty good condition because if I had just been pedaling a bicycle as fast as he was to get to the studios, I'd be huffing and puffing considerably. But we want to point out Chris Anderson is in top physical condition.
Well, I can always stand to be in better condition, but you do what you can.
The Tour de France getting here this morning.
Well, it wasn't windy out. It's not too hot, not too cold. Pretty nice day to ride on. So
you're back just for about 10 minutes this morning to kind of discuss a couple of things we brought up the other day. We had some questions from people who were tuning in.
Yeah, and your caller stumped me on a couple of things. So yeah, I had to go do my homework. And
I think you had some good answers, but you wanted to get some more depth to all of this.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ones was someone brought up about Lockheed's Skunkworks, which of course is where they work on a lot of these advanced programs. And of course people have said, oh, this is where we have the alien technology or whatever. But of course we're going to have secret technology because we don't want our enemies to know we have it. So, but one of the things that they have not been so secretive about is that they're working on a new form of fusion reactor. And, fusion, of course, is this much hoped for down the line form of power generation. And there's, the joke in physics is that a commercial fusion reactor is 10 years away, and it always will be. Because, they've been saying that for a really long time. And one of the big problems is what's called confinement. And that's keeping the material that you want to fuse in a small space long enough for the fusion reaction to take place. And of course, the temperatures we're dealing with here are tens of millions of degrees, so it's a very difficult thing to do. You can't use any form of solid material to hold the stuff in. Anything we have would melt, and so they're typically using magnetic fields to do this. Well, there's a form of confinement called a magnetic mirror that people had looked at some time ago, and they couldn't make it work well enough. It was too leaky, and Lockheed now believes that they're going to revisit that. They're already working on a new form of magnetic mirror confinement, and they claim that they'll have a much smaller reactor. They're talking about a reactor that's roughly the size of an automobile, which would be much smaller than your typical fusion reactors that people have been experimenting with. And they're hoping that they can then scale it up to something that would be commercially viable. But there is more than a few skeptics saying, okay, just because you can make it on the small scale doesn't guarantee that you can pull it off on the large scale too. So it's one of those kind of wait and see things. It'll be interesting to see if they can pull it off. But
this is a bit like that jump from the original Star Trek to the Next Generation, where they decided, all right, lithium crystals don't really exist, so now they have these cores in the ships and containment facilities. But you talk about the heat generated. Containment facility has to be an important part of this.
Right. Yep. And that's like I said, there's basically two designs that people have been working with in recent years. One is basically it's a big spherical containment where they don't really contain it for very long. It's a very short-lived reaction. So the hopes is to make it really, really big, so that even though you don't keep the reaction going very long, you get a big pulse of energy. The other one is the so-called Tokamak, which is sort of a donut shape, and they produce a donut-shaped magnetic field. Well, the Lockheed design basically has a couple of rings that act as magnetic mirrors that bounce the particles back and forth between, and then there's sort of a magnetic band around that. And the reason that Lockheed thinks they're going to be able to do this is because one technology that wasn't available when people first looked at magnetic mirror confinement was superconducting magnets. Well, the superconducting super collider the high energy super collider over in Switzerland, the one they've been creating.
Hadron is what it's
Large
called?
Hadron Collider, right. They've been using superconducting magnets there. So now that technology is getting more mature, and I think Lockheed hopes that they can run with it. And I hope they do. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, there's so many benefits to fusion. One of my favorite is the fact that if you produce a commercial fusion reactor, you can use it to dispose of any sort of waste that you have, no matter how nasty it is, nuclear waste, bio waste, throw it in there and it's turned into utterly harmless stuff. So, we've got all that stuff sitting up the road at INEL that people have worried about. What do you do with it? Throw it in a fusion reactor and it's rendered harmless. I mean, it's called a fusion torch. And boy, if we could get that going, that would be fantastic.
It'd be a revolution in humanity at that
Absolutely,
point.
Yeah.
Do you know where it got the name Skunkworks? A little trivia?
I don't, actually.
That from Little Abner.
Oh, no kidding.
A forge or something in Little Abner that was called the Skunkworks. And so it was adapted from that. I guess Kelly, what was his name? Kelly, he was the big developer at Lockheed. I forgot his last name now. But he was a big fan of the comic strip, and that's where that came from.
Yeah, who says physicists don't have a sense of humor? One of the other things that was asked about was thorium for powering spacecraft. And at the time, I was thinking that the caller was talking about thorium reactors, which are a form of breeder reactor. And for those who aren't familiar, a breeder reactor is basically a reactor that takes a non-fissionable material and converts it into fissionable material. And of course, we've got a very famous breeder reactor right up the road here at INEL. And by the way, if I can put in a plug for them, if you've never been up there to take the tour, it is a wonderful tour. They do a really nice job. And if anyone's worried about the radioactivity, I took a Geiger counter up there with me, and there's nothing that made it trip at all, with the exception of the nuclear rocket engines that they had out in the parking lot. I wouldn't camp out next to them, but if you just walk by them and take a glance, it's not going to hurt you. But yeah, those were a little hotter. That's why they're outside. But anything inside the building, perfectly safe. But it's a really nice look at the history of nuclear power research in Idaho, and it's really extremely well done. It's basically a museum at this point. So
we'll have more coming up in just a couple of minutes on this. In fact, more details on thorium. Chris Anderson joining us from the Herod Center this morning. It's coming up on 9:30, 56 right now at our studios. And I got to point out quickly, I used to live near 3 nuclear reactors on Lake Ontario.
Oh, yeah.
Never had a problem.
No.
Yeah.
Low risk generally.
And the people who worked there were brilliant. So I trusted them. We've got more on the way in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Our guest in the studio, Chris Anderson from the Harrod Center at College of Southern Idaho. And he's following up on some questions that came in from listeners the other day who were tuned in on Monday while he was in our studio on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com online. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. So the question about thorium, because some people are saying this might be a future energy source.
Well, consider India's long-range plan is to have their main power supply, electrical power, generated by thorium reactors. That's their long-term plan. And the big advantage of thorium is that it's much more abundant than uranium. But like all technologies, it has its downside as well. It's basically the reactor we're talking about is a breeder reactor, which means you take, again, non-fissile materials, you put them in proximity to the reactor core, and it turns them into fissile materials. One of the concerns there is that it's really hard to tell whether someone's doing it just to produce power or possibly also to produce weapons-grade materials. So that's because a breeder reactor, that's the only way to make plutonium. Plutonium can't be mined out of the ground. So if you want to make plutonium, you make it in a reactor. And so you'd have to really, watch carefully. But of course, India is already a nuclear power. So, we know they have bombs and, they could make more. But yeah, that's one concern about if we widespread use of thorium reactors would be we'd have to watch them very carefully, make sure people we don't want making nuclear bombs aren't making nuclear bombs with them. But in terms of rocket engines, which was kind of the context on Monday, really, thorium is not the way to go, primarily because a breeder reactor is both heavy and complicated, and that's two things you don't want on a rocket. However, thorium can be used to breed uranium-233. Uranium-233 can be used to power a nuclear engine. And in fact, this is kind of a sad truth that, when the Apollo missions back in the 60s and 70s were first going, the original plan would be that there would be an Apollo 20. Well, as everyone knows, it stopped at 17. 18, 19, 20 were canceled. At that point, it was just thought that, well, been there, done that. It's too expensive at this point. But they were already developing nuclear engines that were going to be able to theoretically compete with the big engines that had sent Apollo up. And they actually had done some test firings on the ground. They've never actually run them in space, but it wouldn't be that hard. And NASA's actually starting to look into it again, the possibility of getting that program going again and using nuclear engines, not for getting up to into space, but for doing missions from low Earth orbit to other locations like the moon and like Mars. So who knows? We might see it happening in the near future, and thorium reactors could play a big part of that in producing the U-233 that would be used in those engines. So
it's about 10 years ago, I had an interesting conversation. I interviewed a fellow who'd written a book about the future, saying that that at least the earthbound energy problem would be solved by a hydrogen-based energy system, and he claims it's not that difficult to collect it. There's a lot of this in the universe, just maybe not as much on Earth.
Well, actually we have a huge supply of hydrogen in our oceans, right? H2O. The difficulty there is you've got to crack the hydrogen apart from the oxygen, which takes energy to do that. So, you're not really gaining anything in the long run by that. It's mostly a way of where the energy is generated, right? So if you've got the power, probably through some other means, whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, to crack the water apart into the hydrogen and the oxygen, then you can use this fuel that when it burns produces absolutely no harmful byproducts. It produces water vapor, which we're perfectly okay with having water vapor in our atmosphere. So yeah, it's really a matter of where the power is generated. So one of the things, and of course you've probably seen Elon Musk just this couple weeks ago announced this sort of refrigerator-sized, hangs-on-the-wall power, basically giant battery for homes. And the thinking there is if we could go from centralized power generation to people generating it at their own homes, by whatever means, that could really go a long ways towards giving us that energy independence we're looking for. Now, the big power companies don't like that idea.
There'd be a lot less in the way of wires, though.
Absolutely.
We have to look at those things
Absolutely.
along the road.
Yep. And a power outage doesn't take out a whole city. It's if you're off the grid, you've got your own separate power source, and yeah. So one possibility is that your home power supply station is sitting there cracking water into hydrogen and oxygen all day while you're at work, and then you come home and you've got all the power you need. It's been the fuel's been produced for you while you were at work all day. So I think it's a great idea. But
I have a friend in New Mexico who's been researching all of this because he built a home on a mesa, and there was really no way to get power up there. So he
Right.
built his own solar panels. I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "I read a book." And then he has his own water purification and collection system with a cistern. But when it would come to a hydrogen power system, I think that would be a much more efficient system for anybody in that situation.
Yeah, there is one concern I know about hydrogen, and that is you got to be really careful not to let it leak, not because of the fire risk, but because free hydrogen is really good at bonding with other chemicals in the atmosphere, which can produce the kind of stuff we don't want, stuff like chlorofluorocarbons. So, you don't want it because it's light, so it immediately goes to the upper part of the atmosphere, and if it gets up there and starts messing with the ozone, now we're back to the ozone problem again. So people have talked about that. Well, if we're going to have hydrogen, fueling stations for cars, you got to make sure that there's no way there's any spill. I mean, we all go to the gas station, and whoops, I dropped a couple of drops of gas when I was taking the pump out, but it's like, yeah, we don't want that with hydrogen. Hydrogen has to be well contained.
Yeah, you can't take care of it with a discarded cigarette like you can at the gas station.
You're supposed to say, that was a joke, folks. Don't do this at home, and if you do, don't sue me.
Chris Anderson, thanks for coming by today.
No problem.
And we'll see you again in a few weeks.
Yes, indeed.
Unless something again comes up like this.
You bet.
All right, it's 9:40. 59 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Got about 20 minutes left before we wrap up the program today. Well, call it 17. I'll give you a more accurate look that way. 59. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I broke down and bought myself a new air conditioner yesterday. After doing some shopping, I did shopping at multiple stores and online, and I was told, of course, by a guy in a store a few days ago. I did not buy one from him, but he was telling me, and I don't think he was just trying to, use this as a sales pitch. I think he's right. When you get that first real shot of hot weather through the area, he said you are going to see these entire shelves go bare. And I believe him. I'm sure that's how it works. You don't say, well, in 3 weeks or 3 months it's going to be hot, so I'll buy the AC unit now. You say to yourself, gosh, it's sticky in here, and then you go out and buy one, because you're reacting to the discomfort that you have around the home. So I bought one. I bought a unit yesterday, but I bought it because I've been looking at this weather forecast. It looks like the weather is going to be very spring-like through the weekend. And originally we were talking about rain both Saturday and Sunday. It's not in the forecast now. It was yesterday. It's been removed, and the forecast right now says maybe some rain Wednesday of next week. But Tuesday of next week, temperatures perhaps in the 90s. So big demand for air conditioning units when that will start happening. But I want to point out, too, as well, if you'd like to save on that air conditioning and you want to save on your electric bill, you might want to give the folks a call at Tint Lady. Because what they do, and they do this for businesses, they do it for homes, they do it for your automobile as well, they do window tints. And that can greatly reduce that heat convection coming through the windows, which means you're not going to have to spend as much when you're actually using that air conditioning unit. So, hey, right there, it's going to tell you in a few years you've paid off the tint. So we recommend you give them a telephone call or go look at their website. The telephone number is 736, let me get that straight, 736-8469, or go to tintladyidaho.com. Now, they're closed Sundays, but you can make an appointment for Saturday, or you can drop by the shop between 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, and that's located at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. And you should note, by the way, they have 20 years experience and are locally owned. And I also have mentioned in the past that it will save you when it comes to cloth around your home. That sun normally bleaches that out, carpets, it bleaches drapes, it bleaches just about anything that it hits that's got color in it. But if you have a tint in the window, you don't have to really worry about that. That'll be much, much slower, and it will prolong the life of your drapes, carpet, furniture, etc. 9:46, Bill Colley with you this morning. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And if you have a question or comment about our show today, 736-0300. 736-0300. I have not talked much on this program about this case about the Dugar family. And I know we had a caller who brought it up the other day, suggesting that the Dugars must be Republicans. And although I got to be honest with you, I don't watch reality television. I had no idea who these people were. I know the folks from Duck Dynasty because I've seen the show twice. And I like what they stand for. but I didn't like the show. I just thought it was a little bit, I don't know, when you've got to actually pretend that it's reality, it doesn't seem anywhere near as entertaining. So this caller was calling up to say, well, you Republicans are all like the Dugars. You're all going around molesting children, and we don't know that the Dugars are Republicans, do we? I mean, has anybody actually, I mean, they have some Republican friends. Sean Hannity pointed out they're friendly with the former governor, the Republican governor at one time of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, but that's because that's where they're from. He said, for all I know, they know Bill Clinton as well. Of course, maybe the Dugar who's accused of actually fondling people. Well, I'm just saying Bill Clinton might be giving lessons. But I listened to this morning. Fox put together a montage. The Dugars, the parents, were on television on the Kelly File last night. This is a montage from the parents as well as some comments over the past couple of years from their son, who had been working for the Family Research Council. Take a listen.
Well, 12 years ago, we went through one of the most darkest times that our family's ever gone through.
The Constitution protects Americans from having a new view of marriage judicially forced upon them.
He said he was just curious about girls, and he had gone in and just basically touched them over their clothes while they were asleep, and they didn't even know he had done it.
I am extremely grateful for my parents and my family.
One ray of hope, and that Josh had a tender conscience.
For the example they set of being selfless and taking time to love each other and to love us for who we are.
Our son violated God's principles of doing some improper touching. That was terrible.
There was so much grief in our hearts. I think as parents, we felt we're failures.
All kinds of punishments on him. We watched him all the time.
The others really didn't know anything of his wrongdoing.
I truly believe that every child deserves a mother and a father.
As I was listening to that, and I was thinking, even the best parents, I mean, if you have good parenting, generally you grow up to be a good person. But we say generally because, hey, let's face it, there have been some axe murderers who had good parents. Most of your axe murderers didn't. They had bad parents who abused them, right? That's the story. But you can work and try really, really hard, and you can have a lot of success with your children, but sometimes some of them are going to do bad things. And unfortunately, they've got to deal with it on the public level, where in most cases, most people just quietly get it out of the way, and outside of the neighborhood, no one knows about it. But of course, except for liberals who like to bring it up and claim, well, gee, all Republicans must be that way. Well, I'll tell you what, when you've got Bill Clinton as the leader of the liberal wing of the Democrat Party, who knows? Mike Gallagher coming up in just a moment. Details on that straight ahead. And, of course, Mike Gallagher is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You can reach them by calling 736-6563. That is 736-6563. And I'm wrapping up in just about 3 minutes today. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. That means you can hear us anywhere all around the world online. And so if you're out of town, you want to keep in touch with what's going on the local level, there you go. When you're in your hotel room or you're on the beach somewhere, take us along. Also wanted to point out, too, as well, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I am back in this chair tomorrow between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning. I have a couple of great guests talking about veterans issues. One deals with a remembrance service, a welcome home service this weekend for Vietnam veterans. That'll take place at City Park. Also, it deals with the upcoming Patriots Night, which is going to be a very, very large event, July 2nd. Taking place right here in Twin Falls, Idaho at CSI, on the campus of CSI. So want you to stick around through the day today as well, but come back tomorrow. And, of course, Rush Limbaugh is up following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following the Fox News at 1 o'clock. Glenn Beck following news at 4 o'clock. Dave Ramsey tonight. And, of course, Coast to Coast overnight with George Noory leading into tomorrow morning. And you can hear Benito tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., and he'll be here, of course, waking you up, and then I'll follow and I'll shake you up. How's that? One quick note before we wrap up today. I wanted to share this quickly if I could. The Daily Caller. Obama IRS political appointees protected Tea Party probe requests. Did you know? This is the most transparent administration in history. That's what we keep hearing, right? We've been hearing that in the media, even though he has actually spied on media members as well as their families. They just like the Stockholm Syndrome. They just keep going along and telling you how great he is. Their knees are dirty, but, they don't seem to notice that as well. And here you go again, one more time, when we keep being told you've got to trust big government. Senior IRS officials set up a special internal committee after congressional investigators sent information requests to the IRS's 2 White House political appointees to investigate conservative and Tea Party nonprofit applicants. Jason Chaffetz, who's of course congressman from this region, if not Idaho, pressed a witness yesterday about the White House involvement in screening documents related to the scandal. He held up an April 2009 memo from the president that required agencies to send any requested documents to the White House that held, quote, White House equities, unquote. Now, this is the president saying, hey, I want to see all of this stuff first, and perhaps cleanse it before it makes it down through the ranks. Chaffetz also said the committee had to subpoena the IRS for the presence of the staffer yesterday. Quote, we will drag the IRS up here every single week if we have to, unquote. Quote, you work for the American people, unquote. What they were trying to do was to squelch this thing and any information, and they were also trying to, all of these requests that were coming from Congress to the IRS were getting an end around, and the lower people involved in the organization simply were being, how shall we put it, cut out of all of this so that the plotters at the top could best figure out how to, well, paper over what they had done. We're coming up on 10 o'clock in just a couple of minutes, and I do want to thank you for joining us today. 59 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Hope you have a great day. Oh, quickly, tonight, 7 o'clock, Act for America has a meeting taking place. That'll be going on Addison Avenue, and just I wanted to mention that again. I am going to be the guest speaker. I hope not to disappoint, but I'm going to be the guest speaker. These people are going to be talking about the threat we have in our culture from the growing Islamic population, some of whom have terrorist ties, some of whom would like to institute Sharia law in the United States. So I hope to see you there tonight, 7 p.m., Rosenau Funeral Home on Addison Avenue in Twin Falls.